Asmat Gurubhyo Namaha, Asmat Paramagurubhyo Namaha, Asmat Sarvagurubhyo Namaha. So we're starting Yatindramata Dipika proper today, and we will start with the pranams, the Mangalacharanam. Sri Venkatesham Karishailanathan, Sri Devarajam Katikadri Simham, Krishnena Sakam, Yatirajamide, Swapne Chadristan, Mamadeshikendran, Yatishwaram Pranamyaham, Vedantaryam Mahagurum, Karomi Balabhodartam, Yatindramata Dipikam. So, Avatar 1, introductory. I glorify Sri Venkatesha, Sri Devaraj, the Lord of Karishaila, Nrsimha, the Lord of Gatikadri, and Yatiraj, together with Krishna, and my supreme teachers who were seen by me in a vision. I bow to Yatishwara, Vedantarya, and Mahaguru, and I begin to compose Yatindramata Dipika for the instruction of beginners. Sriman Narayana alone, having Chit, the sentient, and Achit, the non-sentient, at his qualifications, is the sole reality, one without a second. He alone, who is associated with the non-material realm, is the means to salvation when propitiated by devotion and self-surrender. And he alone is the goal to be attained. Vyasa, Bodhayana, Guhadev, Baruchi, Brahmanandin, Brahmidacharya, Sri Paramkusha, Nata, Yamuna Muni, Yatishwara, and others established this by means of the Vedantic texts. Following their school, I, by the grace of Mahacharya, proceed to expound to the best of my ability and in a summary fashion the work Shariraka Paribhasha called Yatindramata Dipika, based on the Vedanta for the instruction of beginners. Excuse me. All knowable things are divided into two kinds, as pramana, the means of knowledge, and prameya, the object of valid knowledge. The means of valid knowledge is only threefold. The object of valid knowledge is twofold because of the difference as dravya, substance, and adravya, non-substance. Dravya is of two kinds. Jada, material, and ajada, immaterial. Jada is of two kinds, as prakriti, primordial matter, and time. Prakriti is of the nature of 24 categories. Time is of three kinds owing to limitation. The ajada is of two kinds, as parak, the external, and pratyak, the internal. The parak, which is ajada, is in its turn of two kinds, as nitya vibhuti, the eternal manifestation, and dharma bhuta jnana, the attributive consciousness. The pratyak is also of two kinds because of the difference as jiva, the individual self, and ishvara. Jiva is of three kinds because of the difference as Bada, the bound jiva in samsara, Mukta, the released jiva, and Nitya, the eternally free. The Bada is of two kinds because of the difference between Bubukshu, the pleasure seeker, and Mumukshu, with salvation seeker. The babukshu is of two kinds, as arthakama para, devotee of artha and kama, and dharma para, devotee of dharma. The dharma para is of two kinds, as the votary of various gods and the votary of Bhagavan. Mumukshu is of two kinds, as the votary of self-realization, kaivalya, and the votary of release, or moksha. The votary of moksha is of two kinds, as the bhakta, lover of God, and the prapana, one who has resigned his self to God. The prapana is of two kinds, as ekantin, the one-pointed, and paramakantin, the extremely one-pointed. The paramakantin is of two kinds, because of the difference as dripta, the patient aspirant, and artha, the impatient aspirant. Ishvara abides in five forms, because of the difference as para, vyuha, vibhava, antaryamin, and archa. Para, the self-transcendent absolute, is uniform, singular, single, and one, and complete. The vyuha is fourfold because of the difference as Vasudeva, Sankarshana, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha. Keshava, etc., up to Damodar, are other types of vyuhas. They're actually upavyuhas. Matsya and others, the Leela avatars, are vibhavas, incarnations, and they are numberless. The antaryamin, the indweller, abides in every body. The incarnations of Archa are those, that is the deities in the Divideshas and temples, are those special forms presented to the vision of all men in sacred shrines like Srirangam, Venkatadri, Hastigiri, Yadavadri, Gatikachala, etc. Adravya is of 10 kinds because of the difference between sattva, sattva goodness, rajas, passion or activity, tamas, darkness or inertia, shabda, sound, sparsha, touch, rupa, kala, rasa, taste, gandha, smell, samyoga, conjunction, and shakti, potentiality. Now, the definition and examination of the categories will be attempted in the order in which they have been enumerated above. Of these, the instrument of valid knowledge is pramana. What is defined here is pramana. The definition is that it, pramana, has the quality of causing prama, valid knowledge. Prama is that knowledge which is adapted to practical interests of life as they really are. What is defined here is prama. The definition is that prama has a quality of knowledge adapted to practical interests of life as they really are. If it be said, prama is knowledge, there would be over-pervasion in the erroneous cognition of a knacker. Knacker is the shell silver. It's the mother of pearl. It looks like silver, but it's not silver in the form. This is silver. So when we see a shell, when we see a shell, it appears to be silver, but it's not real silver. It's mother of pearl. It's the inside of a shell. Hence, it is said adapted to practical interests of life. Right. So prana is not just any knowledge, but it's knowledge adapted to the particular interests of life. Even then, there would be an over-pervasion, as one may have the perception of a knacker or mother of pearl in the form, this is silver. It is a state of in a state of delusion. Hence, it is said as they really are. So we had that in the definition, as they really are. things as they really are, which, and then the knowledge, so prama is knowledge of things as they really are that has a practical purpose. By the expression, as they really are, samshaya or doubt, anyata jnana, wrong knowledge, viparita jnana, contrary knowledge, are excluded. So when we say as they are, we exclude doubt, we exclude wrong knowledge, and we exclude contrary knowledge. Samshaya is the recollection of several mutually contradictory attributes when a thing is apprehended. For instance, the dubitative cognition in respect of a tall object. So we look at something and we see a tall object that we see. Is it a stump or a man? What is called anyarta jnana is a misapprehension of one attribute for another. For instance, the prediction made by sophistic arguments that the agency of the individual self is a delusion, whereas the individual self shines as an agent. What is viparita jnana is the misapprehension of one thing for another. For instance, the cognition of another object in the place of the intended object. A definition has three defects: avyapti, non-pervasion; ativyapti, over-pervasion; and asambhava, absolute inapplicability. Avyapti is the absence of the definition in a thing sought to be defined. For instance, in the definition, the characteristic of the cow is the possession of orange-brown color. There is non-pervasion in respect of cows possessing white color. Ativyapti, or over-pervasion, is the presence of the definition in something else other than the thing sought to be defined. Asambhava is the absence of definition anywhere in the thing defined. The statement, self is an object of ocular perception, is an example of total inapplicability, because we can't actually see without materialize the self. Therefore, the definition of prama is established because of the absence of the above said three defects. So now we know what is prama. So now coming to pratyaksha. Pratyaksha is the first pramana, which will help us to understand what is prama, or correct or right knowledge. The instrument karana is that which is best, the best cause for the production of prama, right? The best cause is that which is most important. It is said that the instrument is most important by which knowledge arises without delay. So of whatever means, of whatever proper means of pramana, the best one is the one which immediately gives us the proper prama, or right knowledge. It is said that instrument is the most important by which knowledge arises without delay. Hence, it is established pramana is the cause of valid knowledge. The definition of pramana as one who makes known what is not already known and the like are unacceptable, inasmuch as they have been refuted by their own propounders. So the definition of pramana, there are other people who have definitions of pramana, as one who makes known what is not already known and the like are unacceptable, inasmuch as they have been refuted by their propounders. So there are other people who have defined pramana in a wrong way. So pratyaksha. Pratyaksha means sense perception, right? These pramanas are three: pratyaksha, perception; anumana, inference; and shabda, verbal testimony. Of these, pratyaksha is that which is the instrument of valid perceptual knowledge. Perceptual is used to differentiate it from inference. So it's not just inferring something, it's just not logically coming to a conclusion or deducing something, but it's perceptual, it's direct knowledge. Right? Valid knowledge is used to differentiate it from erroneous knowledge arising from the defective sense organ. Right? So pratyaksha does not apply to erroneous knowledge when there's a defective sense organ. And this perception is twofold because of the difference between nirvikalpika, indeterminate, and savikalpika, determinate. What is called nirvikalpika is the cognition of the first individual qualified by its attributes, configuration, etc. So the first time you see something, or the first time you experience something, that is called nirvikalpika, right? Subsequent times are going to be called savikalpika. The savikalpika is the cognition of the second, third, and so on individual qualified by its attributes, configuration, etc., grasped with retrospection. In both cases, this perception has for its object only what is qualified by attributes, etc. Since it is not possible to possess knowledge which apprehends unqualified objects, right? Things that do not exist, the perception of non-differentiate objects is inadmissible. The mode of perception is thus: the individual self is joined with the manas, or mind, mind with the sense organ, and the sense organ with the object of knowledge. Hence, since as a rule the sense organs do their function by coming in contact with the object to be cognized. Therefore, when the visual sense is in contact with an object in the form of a jar, etc., ocular knowledge, or knowledge of coming through the eyes, arises in the form, this is a jar. Thus, also are the tactile and other perceptions of other senses. Right? Conjunction or samyoga is the sense relation when a substance is perceived. When the color of a substance is perceived, the sense relation is dependence in what is conjoined with the sense organ, since we do not admit the relation of inherence. Nirvikalpika and savikalpika perceptions are twofold. As the avarchina, recent, and the anavarchina, or ancient. The avarchina is again twofold, as the dependence of sense and the independent of sense. The independent of sense is twofold, as the self-accomplished and the divine. The self-accomplished is a result of yoga. The divine perception is what is engendered by the grace of Bhagavan. The anarvachina does not require the aid of the senses. It is the knowledge of the liberated selves, the eternals, and Ishvara. The anarvachina has been referred to as owing to the context. Thus, it is established that pratyaksha is the instrument of valid perceptual knowledge. Now, prama, right, or right knowledge, was defined as that knowledge which is adapted to practical interests of life as they really are. But exactly the recollection or smriti also has the quality of being adapted to experience as it really is. Since recollection also may be considered as a pramana, how was it stated that the pramanas are three only? It is, if this be asked, it is said in reply, even if recollection is admitted as a pramana, it has to depend upon reminiscent impression, samskar. Since perception is the origin of recollection, it is brought under perception. And as there is no need to regard it as a separate, and there is no need to, so there's no need to regard it as a separate pramana. Therefore, the pramanas are three only. So recollection is simply a sense perception that happened in the past. And therefore, it's sense perception. It's the same as sense perception, so it's not a separate one. The reason why he's going through this is because there are other people who've written on this subject, and they've defined these things in different ways. So he wants to make sure that you understand the exact meaning according to Ramanuja's school. What is called recollection is the knowledge derived only from the reminiscent impressions caused by a prior experience. And what recalls the reminiscent impression is as follows. Those that rouse the seed of recollection are sadrishya, similarity, adrishya, unseen effect of previous karma, chintya, deep thinking, etc. In accordance with what has been said above, the recaller is sometimes the similar sight of an object previously seen, sometimes an unseen effect of one's actions, sometimes deep thinking. Since the term anadi, etc., where it means beginningless, right? Association or concomitance is to be understood, even that becomes the cause of recollection. What is caused by similarity is thus. If Devadatta and Yajnadatta, two people, resemble each other, the sight of Devadatta rekindles the recollection of Yajnadatta. The second, like the spontaneous remembrance of a prior experience, such as the sacred place of Sri Rangam, etc. The third, like the recollection of the lovely, divine, and auspicious figure of Sri Venkatesha, while consciously thinking. The fourth is thus, between Devadatta and Yajnadatta, who are seen in association, the sight of one rekindles the recollection of the other. The principle is that whatever is well experienced before becomes the object of recollection. The absence of recollection is caused either by long duration of time after experience and by disease, etc., which obscure the reminiscent impressions. Just as recollection is included in pratyaksha, recognition, pratyabhigya, also in the form of this is Devadatta, is included in perception. In our system, since non-existence is nothing but another form of existence, the knowledge of non-existence is also included in pratyaksha. For instance, on this floor, the absolute non-existence of a jar is the floor itself. The antecedent non-existence of the jar is clay itself. The destruction of the jar means potsherds, or broken pieces of the jar, of the pot, clay pot. So when we see there's an absence of a jar, right? We may see there's an absence of a jar. We may see also that there's a cause of the jar, the clay, and there's also the destruction of the jar into pieces. Conjecture or uha is such as this. Indeed, this must be a person. This is an example of a conjecture. It has been said that doubt is the non-determinative condition of the form. What is this tree in front of me? It's an example of a doubt. These conjecture and doubt are also included in pratyaksha. Special mental powers, pratibha, of holy personages are also included in pratyaksha. Since it has been said that according to the knowers of Vedanta, all knowledge is of the real, the perceptual knowledge is of the form of error, etc., is of the real. Rejecting the theories of akyati, non-apprehension, atmakyati, self-apprehension, anivachaniya kyati, indefinable apprehension, anyatakyati, misapprehension, and asatkyati, non-being's apprehension. The theory of satyati, or reality apprehension, is accepted. What is called satyati? The theory of reality apprehension is the reality of the object of consciousness. The object of consciousness. It is said to be asked, what then is Brahma or error? Brahma or error. It is said in reply that Brahma consists in invalidating the workability of an object. We shall thus explain it by the process of quintuplication. All elements are present. All the elements are present in all the other elements, like earth, etc. Okay, so this is in the Sankhya theory of creation. There's a process called quintuplication, where we have what's called tanmatras. We have quintuplication. We have some aspect of each element, because the elements are created from subtle to gross. There's some aspect of each element, previous element, in the element that is made out of it, that comes out of it. Therefore, owing to the presence of a small portion of silver in mother of pearl, nacre, right? The object of that consciousness, that is silver, is true. But there, as the portion of silver content is infinitesimal, it cannot serve the purpose of practical life. Hence, that cognition is Brahma, or erroneous. The Brahma disappears because of the nature of the preponderance of the mother of pearl content of the object. The cognition of dream, etc., is also real. For the Shruti, from the Shruti, we understand that the Supreme Person creates chariots, etc., subsisting only of a certain time, subsisting for a certain time only, for the experience of the particular individual self, in accordance with its spiritual merit and demerit. In the case of the cognition, the conch is yellow. The explanation is as follows. The visual rays of the eye, which are in contact with the bile of the eye, enter into conjunction with the conch. Then the whiteness belonging to the conch is overpowered by the yellowness of the bile and hence not cognized. Right? So the conch is usually white. But because we have some disease, or through some contact with bile, is what he says with it, right? The disease of the eye, if the diseased eye, when somebody has jaundice, he sees things as yellow when they're actually white. Then the whiteness belonging to the conch is overpowered by the yellowness of the bile and hence not cognized properly. We see a yellow conch, that's not a proper cognition. Therefore, arises the cognition the conch is yellow, like a gold gilt conch. The yellowness issuing from the eye, owing to his extreme subtlety, is apprehended by him alone and not by others, right? So because this is a problem occurring because of one person's eye, it doesn't mean that everybody sees the conch as yellow, right? Other people see the conch as white. Likewise, the crystal, which is placed near a china rose, is considered red. So if you have a spatika or crystal and you put it in front of a rose, right, it appears to be a red jewel. It appears like a ruby. The cognition of that is also real, right? So these are all real cognitions. They're considered real, right? They're not considered illusions. If the aforesaid manner, the condition of water in a mirage is also is true, owing to the quintuplication of elements. The process of Panchikarana will be described in the sequel. So he's not going to describe here the full idea of quintuplication, which comes in the Sankhya system of creation, which is accepted. In the same way, the case of one direction being mistaken for another is true, since one direction, which really exists in another direction, is cognized. And apart from the limiting adjuncts which divide the directions, no distinct substance as direction, or dik in Sanskrit, is admitted in the system. In the case of the firebrand, so if we have a stick with a flame on the end of it and we wheel it around, right, and because of the light coming from the fire, it appears to be a circle, right? There's no circle there actually, but because we twirl it around quickly, it's called a firebrand. In the case of the firebrand swung around rapidly, owing to the non-apprehension of the intervals, right, by virtue of the rapidity of the movement, the object itself, which is in conjunction with all points of space, that is a circle, is cognized in the form of a fiery wheel. This cognition is also real. The cognition of one's own face in mirrors, etc., is likewise true. What happens is that when the motion of the visual rays issuing from the eyes towards the mirror is reversed by the mirror, those rays cognize the person's own face after the perception of the mirror. And even in this case, owing to the non-apprehension of any interval between the mirror perception and the face perception, by virtue of the rapidity of the process, the face is perceived as if in the mirror. The case of the apprehension of a double moon, right, when somebody looks up in the sky and they think they see two moons, but it's actually a disease of their eyes or a fault in their eyes, owing to pressure of the finger on the eye, right? So apparently if you push the eye in a certain way, you'll see double. Or by some disease of the eye called timira, right? So we have that verse, timirandasya jnananja vashalaka. Timirandasya means blind, right? Blindness, certain types of blindness. The visual rays are divided, and consequently, there originates difference in the apparatus of vision, samagri. When the mutually independent double apparatus of vision becomes the cause of the cognition of the double moon. The doubling of the apparatus of vision being true, by it, the double apprehension of the moon takes place. Hence, all apprehensions are likewise true, having for their contents objects affected with difference, because of non-different object. A non-different object is never apprehended. Right? So it's the difference that we actually apprehend. Then perception, which is of the aforesaid nature, at first apprehends difference alone. Difference in its experience or expression as such requires a counter entity, right? But never in its essential nature. Hence the faults of regressus in infinitum, to regress to infinity, right? And logical seesaw are absent. Regressus in infinitum, right, is begging the question. Logical seesaw is mutual dependence. Now, why should not the apprehension derived from thou art the 10th, or you are the 10th, be treated as perception? If this be asked, the reply is no. For though thou or you is a perceptual cognition, the 10th I am is sentence generated cognition. If it be insisted that thou art the 10th must be treated as an object of perceptual cognition, then by the same logic, thou art meritorious also must come under perception. If that be admitted, then it will be an extraordinary stretch of the rule. Hence, knowledge generated from such a sentence as that thou art, right, which is a Vedantic sentence, tatvamasi, that thou art, is not immediate. But what has been said, the following distorted views are thereby refuted. So these are views now that have been refuted. Pramana is that which is the instrument of valid perceptual knowledge. That valid knowledge is but consciousness. Consciousness is of three kinds: consciousness limited by the internal organ, consciousness limited by the activity, vritti, of the internal organ, and consciousness limited by the content. When all the three kinds of consciousness become one, then there is immediate apprehension, and that sakshatkara, right, has for its object that which is devoid of any difference. It comprehends difference only. The Nyayika, or the logician's view, that the non-determinate cognition is the apprehension of the mere object divested of all qualifications, such as genus, etc., is also refuted. Right? So we have different schools of thought here which are being refuted. So first of all, we have these Advaitins, and second of all, the logicians, right? And third, we're coming to some others. Now, how is the school of Gautama, meaning Buddhism, refuted? For it has been said that the schools of Kannada and Panini are helpful to the understanding of every branch of knowledge. So Kannada is a sage and Panini is a grammarian, right? And knowledge of their system helps to understand other forms of knowledge. It is if this be said, it is replied, that school is not refuted by us in toto, right? Whatever is amenable to reason, that is accepted by us, like the substance derived from the tank built by others, and not the mire in it or the mud in it. The subsistence derived from a tank of water. We get the water, we get the pure water, but we take the water off the top, but we don't take also the mud from the bottom. This is the example given of taking something from these other schools of thought, which is acceptable. Hence, there is no contradiction in our rejecting the following views, right, which are against the opinion of the Sutrakara, which means Badarayana or Vedavyasa, who wrote the Brahma Sutras. The Sutrakara means the person who wrote the sutras, and others. The causation of the universe by atoms, right? The personal origin. So these are all views, which are other people's views, other schools' views, which are refuted by Vishishtadvaita, by Ramanuja's school. The causation of the universe by atoms. The personal origin of the Vedas, proving the existence of Ishvara by inference. The pervasiveness of the pervasiveness, like the all-pervasiveness of the individual self. Acceptance of generality, inherence, and particularity as categories. To regard comparison as a separate pramana, to consider number, size, separateness, remoteness, proximity, weight, fluidity, etc., as separate attributes, to regard direction as a separate substance, etc. Here ends the first avatar on Pratyaksha of Yatindramata Dipika, composed by Srinivas Das, the foremost disciple of Sriman Mahacharya, an ornament in the line of Sri Madulas. So there's a lot there. There's a lot there, and it goes. It's very complex, and it goes quickly. But do you have any questions or comments on that section?
As you said, it's a lot of terminologies.
Yeah, so it's very terse. It's very terse, and then Vedanta Deshika has written a commentary on it. There's different commentaries on it like that. So if we go into the footnotes and the commentaries and things like that, it'll be more explained. But at the same time, he's enumerating a lot of things. He's saying this is what pramana is. This is what creation is. It's divided into dravya and adravya. which means substance and non-substance, right? And then he's first of all gives all the categories. Then he starts off with pramana, and then the first pramana is pratyaksha. So he starts, and then he gives a comprehensive understanding of pratyaksha. So personally, I don't think we need to go into too much detail of all these things. If it comes to a point where you have to discuss or have to argue about pramana, and we can do that. I have some other books. I have another book, for instance, which is written by a Madhva, right, where he puts up the arguments, and it might be interesting to have a look at it. He puts up the arguments for their system of pramana as opposed to the Sri Vaishnava system, right? And there are arguments back and forth, which are given in this book. So if you really want to go into that, you can. The very simple understanding of pramana and the first pramana pratyaksha is we already understand, and so therefore, when in doubt, if we're doubt, we come to this book and we have to clarify if something is true valid knowledge, how it's being apprehended, right? Because it's not as straightforward as just saying perception, right? What is perception? That's the point. So when we have a doubt, we need to come to this book and we need to look, and we have to look at the commentary, and we have to understand exactly what it is. But normally there isn't a doubt. But if we're arguing with somebody and they have a different understanding of what sense perception is, or different understanding of what right knowledge is coming from sense perception, right, or what can be included in that right knowledge, or what is excluded from that right knowledge caused by sense perception, then we have to look back at this, and the arguments are all given here in brief in the text, but in more detail, giving more examples in the commentaries. And that's why we want to know this. So my opinion is, because it's very, very boring, right? Well, what we have to do is go on. We have to keep going on, and we have to finish the whole text. And then we have to use this text simply as a reference, right? And not waste our time, because human life is short, right? And not waste our time, right, going into the minute details of these things. There are some people who absolutely love to go into the minute details of pratyaksha, pramana, shabda, and all these pramanas, and to argue back and forth without any real conclusion, right? What the different pramanas and what the different things mean. So my point is to simply understand this is what the system of Ramanuja is, right? If you don't like it, you don't like it. If you have some real big question about it, or you really disagree with one of these things, then maybe you want to look at some other form of Vedanta. But apart from that, if it seems reasonable enough, go on and continue until we get to more interesting points. And the other thing is also the conclusions that we come to, right? The conclusions that we come to based on these pramanas, we can be sure that they're true knowledge because of these things. So if at any stage we doubt a conclusion, we can take it back to its base roots of these particular pramanas and see if it fits, if it actually fits that. Okay? So my opinion is to go on and to get through this and to just use it as a reference.
Don't all Vaishnavas, or even Vedantins, or maybe even Hindus, but let's keep it the Vaishnavas at least, accept that Shabda Pramana is highest? Like how you're just making a point that Madhvas, would compare their pramanas with Sri Vaishnavas. So is it that they think that a particular pramana is higher? Isn't it that it's all Shabda that's,
So what we're talking about is we're talking about which pramana is the best to understand a particular aspect of reality, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what it was said there is that the best pramana is the one that you most quickly come to the conclusion, right? So, for instance, if I'm walking in the street, or if I'm walking across the street, at a crosswalk, I have had the remember. I've done this many times, so I remembered it, right? So I have knowledge about it because probably I read in a book, or my parents told me that when you cross the road, if there's traffic there, you should look in different directions, and you should wait until there's a signal that tells you to go across, right? And when there's another signal, you shouldn't cross, right? So what is my quickest way to knowledge about whether I should cross or not? My quickest way is to simply look, right? Now I could look it up in a book. There's a lot of different things I could do, right? To have that cognition of the proper time to cross. But the quickest thing is to just simply look and make an assessment. So because of that, the pratyaksha is, I've given this example. I don't know if it's a really good example. I'm not sure. But the point is that Prabhupada used to say, right, that someone describes to you that the chemical makeup of sugar, right, or of honey, and you can understand it, theoretically. You can understand it from a chemistry book, right? If you simply just take a little bit and touch it to your tongue, right? This is pratyaksha, direct sense perception. So understanding whether a substance is salt or sugar, right? They're both white powders, right? So by seeing them, we don't necessarily know. We can send them to the lab and get analyzed, right? Or we can just simply take a little bit, put it on the tongue, and we'll immediately know whether it's salt or sugar, right? So in some cases, pratyaksha is the proper knowledge will arise from pratyaksha in a much quicker way. So there's no need in every case for scriptural proof. Do I need scriptural proof that fire is hot? I don't. Right? So for some things, pratyaksha is the knowledge arising from pratyaksha is quicker and is more.
But originally you'll be told that fire is hot. Then by pratyaksha,
no, not necessarily.
Well,
Originally the first thing
you
you might do is put your hand in the fire.
You touch it and get burnt. Okay. And then the anumana is like, if you feel some heat, you see some fire. Well, even if you haven't seen fire, but you feel some heat, then you'll think that fire is there, which is derived from the pratyaksha. But I understand what you're saying, that the pratyaksha in some cases is the quicker way, and that's why you're saying that some argue which pramana is better, maybe in some circumstances.
Right.
Because it'll only be in some circumstances, isn't it? Some circumstances you have to go to Shabda, isn't it?
Some circumstances you have to go to Shabda because something cannot be perceived with the gross senses, or it cannot be logically inferred.
And
can we logically infer the nature of Sri Vaikuntham?
Nope.
Can we directly perceive it? Can we directly perceive it?
Nope.
So.
Okay. But anumana is always like a derivative of pratyaksha, isn't it? Because only by having pratyaksha of something originally, then you derive from the knowledge that you have acquired by your senses.
We'll see. We've talked about pratyaksha now. Okay. Next is anumana. Okay. So you're asking about anumana's next chapter.
Okay.
So should we go on? Should we go on and try and get through? Okay.
Yeah.
So let's have a look at the next chapter, anumana. See if we can get through. So, avatar 2. And I believe there's 10 avatars. So that's nice. 10 chapters, right? So the idea was to go quickly through this because, as I said, going too slowly through it is very, very boring. And we need to just have a realization that that the Sri Vaishnava Acharyas, right? And not only them, but also all Vedantins have actually have got a basis in all these things, in Pramana and Brahma, and a knowledge of all these things. So there are different schools of thought and slightly different ideas about these things, and this is what Ramanuja's school accepts. So, and what they've worked out. So now we come to the second avatar, the second chapter, Anumana. Anumana means inference. Now, inference is explained. Inferential cognition is that which is the valid knowledge of the particular pervader, or Vyapaka, obtained from the observation of the pervadedness of the pervaded Vyapya. So you have Vyapaka, the pervader, and Vyapya, the pervaded. Inference is the instrument of that is the inferential cognition. The inferential cognition of fire, that which is the valid knowledge of a particular pervader, fire, obtained from the observation of the fact of smoke being invariably pervaded by fire. So, there's a classical example is that we know what is fire. We have experience of what is fire. And where there is fire, many times there's smoke, or there's always smoke, there's some smoke. And therefore, when we see smoke, right, we infer, we deduce, we come to the logical conclusion that there's some fire in the smoke. Somewhere in the smoke we'll find fire. That the smoke has arisen because of fire, because of combustion. So the pervaded is that which is, as a rule, not more extensive than the Vyapaka. The Vyapaka is the pervader. The pervaded, as a rule, is not more extensive than the pervader in the respect of space and time. The pervader is that which is not less extensive than the pervaded Vyapya in respect to space and time. This pervaded has invariable relation with the pervader, and the pervader is the correlate of that, the pervaded. Therefore, it is said that pervasion is the invariable relation between the pervaded and the pervader, not based on any adventitious condition. This pervasion in the form, wherever there is smoke, there is fire, is perceived after repeated observation. So that's the point there. Only after repeated observation, you're going to come to this conclusion. Pervasion is of two kinds because of the difference as affirmation, concomitance, and negative or concomitance. That should be non-concomitance. When the affirmation of the probans and the probandum is determined, that pervasion is called the affirmative pervasion, right? So when we see the cause, right, is there, it's a positive pervasion, an affirmative pervasion. For instance, whatever has smoke has fire. So if we put it in that way, right, that's considered an affirmative pervasion. When the negation of the probandum, the negative of the probans, the negation of the probans is determined, that pervasion is called a negative pervasion. For instance, whatever has no fire has no smoke. So there are two ways of expressing this. two ways of expressing this. So we can say either whatever has smoke has fire, or we can also say whatever has no smoke has no fire. When the upadi, adventitious condition intervenes, and upadi is both the kinds of pervasion become vitiated, right? When there's some problem there. The upadi is that which is invariably pervasive of the probandum and the non-pervasive of the probans. For instance, where smoke is to be inferred by fire, the upadi is contact with wet fuel, right? So when you have wet wood, right, you get smoke because you can't actually light the fire. The fire isn't properly going. Or when by being the son of Maitri, brownness is to be inferred, the upadi is having been born of a substance of a particular digested green vegetables. Okay, this example is something that my wife and I both totally disagreed with here, right? This example is given because people had this. There was an idea that if a woman, Maitri, right, ate dark vegetables like spinach, right, dark colored vegetables like spinach, that her child would be born with a darker skin. Okay, and this is an old wives' tale, perhaps in India or maybe in other cultures also, like that. But they're giving it as an example. They're giving it as an example of this type of upadi or of mistake. So the upadis are the upadi is of two kinds. The upadi is a name that we give to something, right? The upadi is of two kinds: the determined and the doubted. The determined is as follows: service of Ishvara, service of God, is service, right? It is disputed. It is a cause of sorrow because it is servile, like the service of a king, right? So there's a determination like this. It's stated that service is a cause of sorrow. So then why should we serve God, right? Because that will be a cause of sorrow, because service is always a cause of sorrow. But here the upadi is the effectuation of sin. But since it is established that this does not exist in the service of Ishvara, once we serve Ishvara, then all our sins are gone, right? This upadi is called the determined. The doubt is as follows: the individual self, it is disputed, after giving up the body, becomes free because the samadhi, right, perfect meditation, is perfect like that of Sukha. Sukadev. Here, the upadi is absolute destruction of karma, right? Since it is doubtful whether such condition exists or not in the individual self, the subject of dispute, whose meditation has become perfect, this upadi is called the doubted. Hence, it is established that the probans is present where there is unconditional relation. There has to be an unconditional relation. Vyapya, right, or the pervaded, sadhana, and linga. Linga means form, right? Sadhana means the process. Are not different. Are not of different meaning. The vyapya has two forms: pervasion and subject characterization, which are the two limbs of inferential cognition. It has also 5 forms or conditions. There are the presence of the subject, paksha sattva, the presence of similar substance, sapaksha sattva, and the absence of the probans in counter instance, where there's no cause, right? Vipakshad, vyavriti, unstultified object, abhadita vishayatva, and absence of the opposite proband, so the opposite cause, right? Asat pratipakshatva. Okay. Paksha or subject is that substrate which is qualified by the attribute desired to be inferred as a mountain, etc., in which fire is to be inferred, right? So the typical example is that there's a mountain, and we look up on the mountain and we see smoke, and we think that there's fire there, right? So we're inferring that there's fire on the mountain. Sapaksha or similar instance, so we've got paksha or subject, sapaksha, similar instance, is that which possesses similar attributes to the probandum, which is desired to be inferred as a hearth, etc., in which the concomitance of fire and smoke is observed. Vipaksha or counter instance, right? These are all explained, these different terms, is that which is devoid of the probandum, as well as similar, another similar, and to that, as a lake, etc. Vipaksha counter instance. So a counter instance of a place where fire would occur is a lake. Obviously, fire doesn't occur in water. So, badita vishayatva, stultified object, is a non-existence of the probandum, which is established in the subject by strong evidence, as the lake has fire. Non-existence of that is unstultified object. Asat pratikshashatva is the non-existence of an object by a equally powerful evidence. Proband's of such description is twofold. Because of the difference as anvaya vyatireka, vyatirekin, the affirmative with the negative, and kevalan avayin, bare confirmation. Okay, so the aforesaid five-form probands. Probands means the way of means of proof, is of the nature of anvaya vyatirekin. So anvaya vyatirekin is being described here. As the mountain has fire because it has smoke. Whatever has smoke has fire. As a hearth, whatever has no fire has no smoke, like a lake, right? The same province without counter instance is bare anvayin. As Brahman is expressible by word because it is a thing like a jar. Counter instance. The bare anvayin has four forms only because of the non-existence of the counter instance. As the probandum, right, that which is to be proved, is not known in kevala vyatirekin, bare cognigation, the pervasion of cognigation is hard to understand. Therefore, the bare negative probans is rejected. The inferential cognition of objects which are absolutely beyond the senses in bare anvayin or anvaya vyatirekin is thereby refuted. So to infer things, inferential cognition of objects which are absolutely beyond the senses, right, by this bare or kevala vyatirekin, right, is rejected. Right, so okay. So anyway, dividing this inference, some say it is of two kinds: that for oneself and that for another. Others say that inference is for oneself alone, for all inferences, owing to their origin by virtue of self-comprehension, become the cause for one's experience only. The syllogism, which apprises that inference is made up of 5 members, such as Pratigya Hetu, Udaharana, Upanaya, and Nigamana. These Pratigya or thesis, right? Pratigya or thesis is the statement which predicts the subject as this mountain has fire. Hetu or reason or cause, right, is the statement of probans as because it has smoke. Udaharana, typical instance, right, is the statement of example after the pervasion is pointed out. This is twofold because of the difference as affirmative or negative. So, for example, whatever has smoke has fire as a hearth is an affirmative example. Whatever has no smoke has no fire, has no smoke, like a lake. That's a negative example. Upanaya application is the concluding statement of the concomitant probans of cause of knowledge, right? In the subject by pointing out the example. This is also twofold because of the difference between affirmative and the negative. And so this has smoke is the application of an affirmative type. And so this is not without smoke is the application of the negative type. Nigamana, conclusion, is the concluding statement of the probandum, right, that which is to be done, right, in the subject by means of the probans, by which we are knowing him, the cause of knowledge. Even this is twofold, as therefore this mountain has fire is the conclusion of an affirmative type, right? So remember, an affirmative conclusion, we come to the conclusion, therefore the mountain has fire. This mountain has fire. And a negative conclusion would be, therefore this mountain is not devoid of fire. There's a negative type. It's not devoid of fire. Thus, the logicians are the upholders of the 5-membered syllogism, right? So this is the way that people talk about it in logic. So to know more about this, we study logic. So some people will study a book called Tarka Sangraha, and maybe some other books before they do this, which are from the Nyaya school or the logic school. And there's even another school called the Navya Nyaya, or the new type of life. So there's traditional Nyaya or logic, and then there's this other school of Navya Nyaya, right? So the logicians go into more detail about this. The Mimamsakas, right? Mimamsaka means deliberation, and Mimamsakas are the Karmakandis, people who follow the first part of the Kandas of the Vedas. The first discussion of the Vedas is Karma Kanda, then Jnana Kanda and Vipassana Kanda, different form parts of the Vedas, right? The Jnana Kanda is considered the Vedanta order. The Vedanta or the knowledge portion, the Upanishads. The Mimamsakas are the expounders of the 3-membered syllogism, which is of the nature of Pratigya, Hetu, and Udaharana. So those were all described before, right? So we're saying that our system has this idea of 5 types, five parts of a syllogism, and we follow the Nyaya school. And then the Mimamsakas have this three-form syllogism, Pratigya, Hetu, and Udaharana, which again mean thesis, reason or cause, and typical instance. The Mimamsakas. Okay, so down here it says, but for us, we don't fix the number. Okay, so the Mimamsakas have these three. The Sogatas are Buddhists. The Sogatas are the expounders of the bi-membered syllogism, which is only just the last two, not the thesis, but the cause and the repeated, what is it? The cause and the typical instance, right? But for us, there is no fixing the number. In certain cases, there may be 5 members. In other cases, 3 members, and in others, again, 2 members. Since by udaharana and upanaya, only pervasion and subject characterization are established. The inference is accomplished by these 2 only. Since by expansion and reduction of members, the usages of weak, mediocre, and sharp minds are accomplished. So once again, since by the expansion and reduction of the members in the syllogism, right, in the way of terming the inference, right, the members of the inference can either be expounded or can be expanded or contracted sometimes. It can be contracted sometimes because you only need to say put forward a couple of these things, and then very intelligent people can understand the reasoning. Sometimes you have to really spell it out, and you have to put it in so many different terms that a person who's not so sharp can get it. So in this manner, right probands, right, of course, of understanding the prabandham, the meaning, right, accompanied by the 5 members, causes the inference of fire. So in this situation where he gave that full syllogism. From the expression right probands, it follows that inference of fire is not possible from the mass of dust resembling smoke. Right? So if actually when we look, we don't see smoke, but we actually see a bunch of dust, then obviously we can't make that assumption. Some say the fallacious reasons, literally appearance of probands, are those which appear like reason, which they are not. They are divided into 5 kinds: as asiddha, unestablished; viruddha, adverse; anaikantika, inconsistent; prakaranasama, equal explanation; and kalayatya pradishta, right, vitiated by time. So now he's going to explain that. Of these, the asiddha, right, asiddha, which again means unestablished, are of 3 kinds. So asiddhas are 3 kinds. Swarupa siddha, unestablished regarding itself; ashraya siddha, unestablished regarding the locus or the place, right? And vyapyatva siddha, unestablished regarding its pervasion. Swarup siddha, an example of Swarup siddha is as follows: the individual self is eternal because it is visible like a jar, right? So that's an example of something unestablished regarding itself. The ashraya siddha example is as follows: the sky lotus, or flower that's born in the sky, right, which is not something which is not real, right? Sky lotus is fragrant because it is a lotus, like the lotus grown in a pond, right? So lotus, we have an experience of a lotus. Lotus is grown in the pond, and the lotus has some smell, right? So then we think that there's a lotus which is in the sky, which is unreal, right? So that also should have a fragrance, right? But the point is, it's unestablished regarding its locus or place, because we think of it as being in the sky. It doesn't exist, and therefore its fragrance also doesn't exist. Okay, so sky lotus is the locus, and it is never established, meaning that is, it never exists, right? So that's called ashraya asiddha, right? And then the third one, which is called vyapyatva siddha, is twofold. The first one is due to the absence of evidence which establishes one to grasp the pervasion, and the other is due to the presence, right? So again, the first, there are twofold vyapyatva siddhas, right? Examples, right? The first one is due to the absence of evidence which establishes one to grasp the pervasion, right? We're talking about, and the other is due to the presence of an adventitious condition, in the probandum. The former one is as follows. Whatever is existent is momentary. Whatever is existent is momentary. Here, the evidence that enables one to grasp the pervasion between existence and momentariness is unestablished, right? So there's an assumption. This is especially an assumption of Buddhists, right? Is they assume that everything is momentary. Everything exists, but only momentarily, and then it changes like that. But the evidence that enables one to grasp pervasion between existence and momentariness is unestablished. The latter is as follows. The slaying involved in the agnistomia, right? So in the engenders demerit because it is of the nature of slaying, like slaying, which is outside the pale of kratu meaning the sacrifice. So in the agnistoma sacrifice, there may be the killing of an animal. So the slaying involved in the agnistoma sacrifice engenders demerit. In other words, because you're killing an animal, there's demerit. Because of the nature of slaying, because the nature of slaying outside of the pale of sacrifice gives demerit. So here, the prohibition of killing animals is the adventitious condition. Therefore, the probans, which is of the nature of slaying, is conditioned, right? So the actual demerit comes about in killing an animal only when it's outside of sacrificial boundaries, right? But inside the sacrifice, there is no demerit. Viruddha is that reason which is pervaded by the contrary or non-existence, that is non-existence of the probandum. As matter is eternal, because, okay, so the example given here is matter is eternal because it is produced like time. Here, the reason, producibility, right, is pervaded by the non-existence of the probandum, right? So produce has nothing to do with the thing to be proved, right? Anaikantika is also known as savya bichara, which is of two kinds. Sadharana, sadharana just means general or common, right? And asadharana, or uncommon fallacy. So there are two types of fallacies, right? There's a common fallacy and an uncommon fallacy. So we'll get some examples of that. Sadharana is that which is present in the subject, in a similar instance, and a counter instance, as sound is eternal because it is knowable like time. That's an example of that. Asadharana, an uncommon fallacy, right, is that which is not present in the similar instance and the counter instance, as earth is eternal because it has smell. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? So that's it's an uncommon fallacy. So these are two fallacies here, right? Two fallacious statements. Prakarna sama is that which admits a difference, or that is counter reason, that proves the contrary, that is non-existence of the probandum, as in Ishvara or God is non-eternal because he's devoid of eternal attributes, right? So that's a fallacious statement because obviously that attribute of the eternal attributes do adhere in God. And the counter reason is, the other way of putting it is, Ishvara is eternal because he's devoid of non-eternal attributes. This itself is called Sat Pratipaksha. Kalatraya Pradishta is as follows. Kalatraya Pradishta is that reason which is present in the subject in which there is the non-existence of the probandum. That is, fire is not hot because it is a substance like water. So that doesn't make any sense. These are all fallacious statements. As the hotness, and there are different types, and they're categorized here. Okay, so as the hotness of fire is determined by tactile perception, the proband is stultified. Having thus explained inference, comparison, upamana, and others are included under inference, right? So there are some schools which separate comparison from inference, right? But there are other things, these other things of these other schools, these other pramanas are all underneath the umbrella of inference. And others are included under inference. For instance, upamana is the knowledge of a figure qualified by cow similarity. So inference, we infer something by comparison. We see something which looks like a cow, we compare it to a cow if it has cow similarity, which is accompanied by the recollection of the meaning of an assimilative statement. For atidesha vakya, vakya means a statement, atidesha means assimilative statement. A person, though ignorant of the meaning of the word gavaya, meaning cow, right, hears from a forester, right? Oh, gavaya is a type of animal which is like a cow, right? It's in the forest. It's a forest type of animal. Hears from the forester that gavaya is similar to a cow. He goes to the forest and remembers the meaning conveyed by the assimilative statement. When he sees the figure qualified by cow similarity, right, then there arises in him the knowledge of the figure qualified by cow similarity, accompanied by the recollection of the meaning of the assimilative statement heard before. So a forest dweller, told him that if he goes in the forest, he might see something that looks like a cow, but it's not a cow. It's a gavaya, right? And therefore, that knowledge is said to be upamana or comparison. Upamana is included under perception. Upamana is considered included under pratyaksha, right? Perception, since it is of the nature of a recollection. The nature of a recollection. It is brought under inference it's also brought under inference as it requires or depends on the cognition of pervasion, that thing has the cow similarity. And it is included under verbal testimony also, so it comes under all three, right? As it is sentence generated, because you spoke to a person who dwells in the forest, and that person explained to you in a sentence that there's a cow similarity. There's an animal in the forest that has cow similarity that is similar to a cow, and it's a gavaya. So because the knowledge arose from a sentence of the forest dweller, it's also understood to be shabda, or authoritative statement, verbal testimony. It is called artapati when postulation of eating at night is made, because fatness is seen in a person who does not eat by day. This is included under inference. Okay, so there's a thing called artapati, which also some other schools term as a separate pramana. Artapati, it's a type of inference. And the example given is, there's a person who you see through the day. He doesn't eat anything in the day. But day by day, he gets fatter, right? So that person, that fatness seen in that person who doesn't eat a day, gives us the inference that he actually must be eating some other time. He must be eating at night. So that is called tarka, reductio ad absurdum. So reduction to the absurd, right, is the acceptance of the pervada, vyapaka, by the hypothetical admission of the pervaded, vyapya. For instance, an example of this is, for instance, in the inference, the mountain has fire because it has smoke. If somebody says this is an inference. The mountain has fire because it has smoke. If someone says, let there be smoke, but no fire, the refutation would be, if there were no fire, there would be no smoke also. This tarka, or logic, right, is an aid to pramana. So tarka is also, or logic is an aid to pramana, to these pramanas. So there has to be some logic. It has to be rational. Pramanas have to be rational, right? Okay. Nishchaya. These are all other things which come under the heading of anumana, or inference. Nishchaya, or ascertainment, is the determination of truth by means of pramana, aided by tarka, aided by logic. Vada, or discussion, is debate between two parties without any prejudice. Right? So here, the next three, we're going to be talking about different or different types of discussion between different parties on the nature of reality. Right? So when we have Vada, this Vada means that the two parties have got no prejudice, and they're simply trying to find out the truth. Jalpa or wrangling is that discussion which establishes the position of both the sides by those who are desiring to gain victory. So there's, first of all, there's discussion. Second of all, there's another thing called jalpa, which is wrangling, having a dispute to try to in which each side is trying to establish their form, their ideas. Pitanda, or cavil, consists an opposition to the other side without establishing one's own position in argument. So sometimes we have these arguments where people are simply trying to knock down the other person's ideas, but they're not actually giving any positive point themselves. They're not trying to establish their own philosophy, but they're simply trying to defeat the other person's philosophy. Chala, or quibbling means this sort of, small discussion or small argumentation, right? Consists in attacks on the opposite side by attributing unintended meaning to a word, right? So when we see that there's a discussion between different disputants, right? And when they're just simply pointing out different meaning or an unintended meaning of a particular word or words, right? Then that is called quibbling. Jati, or futility, consists of pointing out a defect that pervades one's own position, right? So putting out a defect in the other person's argument, but which is also a defect in your own argument, right? Or wrong reply, or if you make a wrong reply, right, to in an argument, that is called jati. Nigrahastana. Stana means a place, right? So ground of defeat. Nigrahastana is the cause of one's defeat. So in a disputation, there's a thing called nigrahastana. All these, being the limbs of inference, right, are included under anumana. So all of these are included under anumana. There is no contradiction in interpreting here. And there is no contradiction in interpreting here and there according to the school of the Nyayayikas, the logicians, right? Thus, inference has been explained. So he's saying that that the followers of Ramanuja do follow the system of logic given by the logicians in the school of Nyaya and Navya, right? Thus, inference has been explained. This ends the second avatar, second chapter on Anumana of Yatindramata Dipika, composed by Srinivas Das, the foremost disciple of Sriman Mahacharya, the ornament in the line of Sri Vadulas. So that's even more tough tough portion here. And now we're going to get to Shabda as the next one.
Yep. Okay.
Okay. So and in taking with the point made in the introduction or the preface given by Alkondavilli Govindacharya, he said to start with the fourth avatar, to start with the fourth chapter. And my point is here to get through the first three as quickly as possible. If there's any reason to go back, we can use the first three chapters as inference. Not as inference, as a reference, right? When we have some problem, if we're disputing with somebody, or if there's some problem in our own mind about whether something is true or not, whether it's something is real knowledge, then we can look back and we can analyze it in these terms. And these are all the terms that, and if we want to go further, like I said, if we want to go further into the reasoning behind these definitions, because mostly they're just definitions, and you really need a commentary to go into them more deeply. Then if you want to do that, you can do that, but normally it's not necessary. Normally it's pretty, for our purposes, it's when we're not great scholars who are going to have, we're not going to dispute with Sanskrit pundits. So for us, it's just enough to have a basic understanding of these things. So we want to continue on? See if we knock out
Swami.
Shabda.
So let's just finish Shabda, and that should be it.
That'll be enough to cook our brains today. Right. Okay. So we'll see. The third avatar, Shabda, because I really don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this book, but I want to, but it needs to be said. It needs to be put out there. And then we can go into further, like if there's some point where we can go into further into the details of some things like that to prove what we're saying is, proof statements. Because just to stay, like our understanding coming from ISKCON, our understanding of Pratyekshana and Shabda as being three pramanas, it's a very shallow understanding. It's not. It is a system, right, to say Pratyekshana and Shabda are the three things, but to explain exactly what those three things are and all the with examples, and to try to understand them completely, right? That is a completely different thing, and that's what is trying to be done in here in this text. So anyway, at least we get the idea that there's more to it than just those three simple definitions. So Shabda, or verbal testimony, of right after the exposition of inference, right, or anumana, which came after Pratyaksha or sense perception. Shabda, verbal testimony, is explained. Verbal cognition is the knowledge of the meaning derived from the sentence. Right? Here's the definition. Verbal cognition is the knowledge of the meaning derived from the sentence, unuttered by a non-trustworthy person. The Shabda Pramana is the instrument of that verbal cognition. Unuttered by a non-trustworthy person, it's a double negative here, right, has been said to refute the doctrine of the personal origin of the Veda. The reason why it's said here with a double negative is to refute the doctrine, which is a wrong doctrine, that the Veda is authored. So to refute that doctrine, to say that the Veda is unauthored, it is put in this way: unuttered by a non-trustworthy person. Or that sentence is Shabda Pramana, which is devoid of the errors of instrument. The errors of instrument, or karana means cause, the causes of error, right? And sublating cognition, right? Stopping us from cognizing or from proper knowledge. The Madhvas go into great detail in this, in the idea of Shabda, Shabda Pramana, and the definition of a sentence, the definition of a word, and all this sort of thing, right? There's a book by Jayatita called Pramana Padati, which goes into this in great detail in the Madhya school. Okay, so anyway, we'll continue on. In the beginning of every creation, Bhagavan, remembering the Vedas in the same order as they had been before, teaches them to Chaturmukha Brahma, four-headed Brahma. Since it has been said so in the scriptures, eternality and impersonal origin of the Veda are established. Right? So because of this statement in the scriptures, in the Vedas, that the Lord remembers the Vedas and teaches them to Brahma at the beginning of each creation. So because of that, we accept the eternality because he remembers them, because he doesn't make them up, right? And the impersonal origin of the Vedas also, because they're remembered by him. They're not by the Supreme Lord. They're not actually authored by anybody. Therefore, they are devoid of the errors of instrument and sublating cognition. Now, how can there be authoritativeness for Vedic texts inasmuch as the Mimamsakas, right? Remember the Karma Kandis, the disputers, or the maintain that they denote what ought to be accomplished, and since it is not possible to know the meaning of those texts which denote Brahman, the Supreme Absolute, which is already existent. So that's the question. So again, the question is, now, how can there be authoritativeness for the Vedic texts, inasmuch as the Mimamsakas maintain that they denote what ought to be accomplished, and since it is not possible to know the meaning of those texts which denote Brahman, right, which is already existent. Okay. If this be question, no, right, for even the texts which denote Brahman, an existent entity, are admitted to have meditation for their purport, right? Expressive power is also seen in sentences denotive of existent facts, such as, your father is doing well. Expressive power. So in ordinary experience, it is seen that when children are taught gradually and repeatedly by their mother, father, etc., by pointing out with a finger at the children's mother, father, uncle, moon, etc., and using words to denote them, ideas arise in the mind that such and such words denote such and such things. Okay, so the father and mother first people who teach the child, and they point to things. They point to things and they point to this and they say, that's a cup, cup. Right? They point to themselves and they say, father, they say, mother. Right? And so therefore, these ideas arise in the minds of children, of anybody, when you point to things, or when you explain things and point to them or indicate them, right? And say and define them. Similarly, in the case of the Veda, also there's a possibility of words conveying the knowledge even in respect to existent entities, right? Hence, there is no room for doubting the authoritativeness of the Vedas, right, of the Veda. Nor should it be doubted that how that portion of the Veda which treats abhichara means, for instance, in the Atharva Veda, right, they have some curses and some different sort of what could be considered even black magic type of things, right, abhichara, right, etc., can be authoritative, right? So nor should it be doubted that how that portion of the Veda which treats abhichara, etc., can be authoritative, because its final end, the final result or the final end, is by demonstrating the visible results to create volitional desire, right? So abhichara is also, there's also parts of it where you control other people, right? Vasikarna, which is called Vasikarna, right? By demonstrating the visible results to create volitional desire for conducting activities which bring about invisible fruits such as heaven, etc. So just because the Vedas speak of doing some sacrifices and there being some fruits of that, right, does not mean that we doubt that the Vedas can also tell us about the nature of the Supreme. The text, the sacrificial post is the sun, denotes that the sacrificial post is as bright as the sun. Hence the authoritativeness of the Veda in totally, right? So every part of the Veda is authoritative, right? Not just the parts of like the Upanishads, which tell us about the nature of the Supreme, but also the parts, right, which tell us about the different sacrifices, whether they be Vyasikarna, Abhichara, all different sorts of things. They are also authoritative. The Veda is divisible into two parts. The earlier one treating the work and the latter one treating Brahman. So this is what we said before, the Karma Kanda and the Jnana Kanda, right? So the first one telling us about the different sacrifices which are performed, right? And the second one, which so sometimes called Upasana Kanda, sometimes called Jnana Kanda, is the second part, which is dealt with in Vedanta, the Upanishads, and the first part, which deals with the different sacrifices, right? So, which is the Karma Kanda section. The earlier section is that which treats work, that is worship, right? So the work which is dealt with there is the performance of sacrifices. The performance of sacrifices, or yajna, is for the worship of God, or Brahman, or Ishvara. The latter section is that which treats of Brahman, which is the object of worship, right? So Brahman is described in the Upanishads, right? In the Jnana Kanda or Upasana Kanda, right? Which is also the object of worship. So it's called Jnana Kanda because it treats with the knowledge of Brahman, but it's also called Upasana Kanda because it deals with the worship of the Lord. Hence, because we worship him simply by meditating upon him and understanding him, there are 32 Upanishadic vidyas or methods of doing this worship. 32, or sometimes people say 33. I think Shankaracharya said 33, but 32 versions, one of which is called the Nyasa Vidya, which becomes property, his property. So, hence, both of the Mimamsakas, both of the people who deliberate, both of the deliberators, right? There's the first ones and the second ones. There's the Purva and the Uttara. The Purva Mimamsas, right, are the Kamakandis, and the Uttara Mimamsas are the Vedantins. Constitute a single scriptural authority. So there are books on Karmakanda. They are also an authority. And Ramanuja believes that the first Vedanta Sutra, Atata Brahma Jigyasa, now is the time to study about Brahman, or in other words, to go to the Brahma Kanda, the Jnana Kanda, the Upasana Kanda, the second, the Uttara Mimamsa, right, means necessarily that you've already studied, or you've got to the point of understanding or studying the Mimamsa, the Purva Mimamsa, which is sometimes just called Mimamsa, but the Purva Mimamsa, or the Karma Kanda section of the Vedas. But both the Purva Mimamsa and the Uttara Mimamsa in Sri Vaishnavism are considered to be single scriptural authority, the Vedas. The Veda, which embodies in itself these two sections, right, abides in fourfold form: Rig, Yajus, Saman, and Atharvan. Okay, so we're talking about the Vedas here. We've defined them as subsisting in these four sections. And actually, we can think of them in 5 sections also, because we can think of the Shukla Yajurveda and the Krishna Yajurveda. So again, it abides in innumerable forms. So it's there. It's not. There are many Vedic branches, and Some of them are not extant today, but anyhow, it's innumerable. It's infinite. The Veda consists of manifold forms of rik, etc., is of three kinds. So there are three kinds of these Veda mantras. There's mantra, artavad, and vidi. So mantra indicates a thing to be done or performed. Yeah. Artavad, which is like an explanation, right, is that passage which encourages the activity due to the vidi. Right? And then here, vidi is that passage which enjoins what is beneficial to oneself. What is beneficial? Right? Vidi is a rule. It's a commandment. Right? So in vidi, there are three kinds: apurva, parisankhya, and niyama. Again, they are manifold because of the difference in nitya, naimitika, and kamya. So we have three different types of activities. We have nitya, eternal, or daily. We have naimitika, occasional. And we have kamya, which is done for a particular purpose, to fulfill a particular desire, kamya. So there are differences in these different types of vidis. So now we're going to understand what the different types of vidis are: the apurva, the parisankhya, and the niyama. Apurva vidi is such as he sprinkles rice grains with water. Apurva vidi. Right? Vishishta vidi. Vishishta vidi is the injunction of meditation, such as manomaya, which we get in Taittiriya Upanishad. Manomaya, pranomaya, jnanomaya, anandomaya, like this. That there's the injunction of meditation. Parisankhya vidi is such as the injunction relating to the horse rope. One takes up the horse rope with the mantra. That's a type of. These are all different types of rules, different types of prescriptions for somebody to do. This rope the ancients took up, for example. So he gives a different example. Niyama vidi is such as the injunction relating to approach of a student to the preceptor. So a niyama is a rule. There's two types of rules. There's yama and niyama. So here we're talking about niyama, right? Yama means to do something. Niyama means normally not to do something. But here niyama is described, and it's niyama vidi is described as an injunction which has to be done, like that. Injunction relating to the approach of the student to the preceptor. The student has to approach the teacher in order to gain knowledge. Nitya vidi, such as the injunction relating to morning and evening meditation. So nitya vidi, an eternal or daily prescription, right, or rule, right, is like doing the sanya vandana, morning and evening meditations. Naimitika vidi is such like the injunction relating to postnatal, ishti, etc. So ishti is a Vedic sacrifice, which is done, right? And normally done once every 2 weeks, like that. After one has a son or one has a daughter, when a child is born, postnatal ishti, there's a difference in the ishti. So this is a naimitika vidi. Naimitika vidi is something that doesn't occur all the time, right? One doesn't have a child every single day. So therefore, the ishti, this postnatal ishti, different naimitikas, like different samskaras that come up, and different sacrifices according to time. They're called naimitika vidis. Okay, so kamya vidi is such as the injunction relating to jyotishtoma. So jyotishtoma is a kamya vidi. It's something that somebody does because they have a particular desire. So for instance, we might have, like in the Ramayana, we have King Janaka, right? Sita's father, he performed a putra kameshti yaga. So it was a big sacrifice in order to gain a child. So that was his desire. Thus, the Veda, which is of the nature of vidi, artavad, and mantra, has for its limbs, and here are the different limbs, right? Chandas, Kalpa, Shiksha, Nirukta, Jyotish, and Vyakarna. Okay, so the Veda, if we think of the Veda as a personification of a person, like a person's body, right? Then we can think of these are called Vedangas, or the different parts of the body, right? So we can think of the first of all, there's Shiksha, which is taught in the very beginning. The lesson on Shiksha comes in the very beginning of the Taittiriya Upanishad. Shiksham Vya Atyasyaamaha Varna Swaraha Matra Balam Samasantanaha Ityukta Shiksha Dhyayaha. So that is the lesson on Shiksha. Shiksha means pronunciation. So first of all, pronunciation. The second thing, they put it in a slightly different order here. First of all, pronunciation, Shiksha. Then after pronunciation, then Vyakarna. First, then we have to learn grammar, Sanskrit grammar, after knowing the pronunciation of letters. And then how to put the letters together and form words, either vowels or either verbs or nouns, right? And then put them together to mean things, right? So Shiksha Vyakarna, Nirukta means the etymology, the word meanings, right? So Jyotish, Chandas means to a prosody or poetic meter, like that. Jyotish means astrology and astronomy, like that. And Kalpa means ritual. So in order to perform the ritual, we have to know the mantras. In order to know the mantras, we have to first of all know the pronunciation of the letters. We have to know the grammar of Sanskrit, the Vyakarna. We have to know the poetic meter, the Chandas, right? We have to also know the meaning of the letters, Nirukta, and we have to understand the Muhurta, by Jyotisha, we have to understand when to perform the sacrifice and when not to perform the sacrifice. And then we have to actually perform the sacrifice, Kalpa, the actual sacrifice. So all these limbs are included in the Vedas. They are called Vedangas. And they can be seen as different limbs of the body. If the Veda are the body, then they can be seen as different limbs. The Chandas are like the feet by which we go through a text, right? The Shiksha is like the Shiksha is like the nose, and because by pronunciation in the nasal passages in the mouth we make the pronunciation. The Vyakarna is like the ears. The Vyakarna is like the mouth by which we speak the mantras, right? The grammar. The Nirukta is the etymology is the ears by which we understand the grammar, right? We understand the mantras. The Jyotish is like the eyes because we can see past, present, and future through astrology, and we can see the proper time to do the sacrifice. And the Kalpa is compared to the hands by which we actually perform the sacrifice. So those are the limbs of the Vedic body. Right. So just after explaining that, right, we're going to get some definitions here of these things which I've just already given. But anyway, they're doing it in a different order. Chandas or prosody is the treatise on meter of mantras, such as Anustup, Tristup. These are different meters, right? And it is usually it's called Pingala Chanda Sutras, which can be studied to completely understand prosody or Chanda Shastra, Chanda Vedanga. Kalpa, ritualistic science, which is that which is expounds the Shrauta or the Vedic yagas or Vedic sacrifices and Smarta rituals, like the different samskaras that we perform, 40 samskaras. Now nowadays people think there's only 16, but it's actually 40 samskaras, and even 16 are not being performed today. So shiksha is the nature of determining the quality or accent of the letters. So shiksha also includes not only the pronunciation of the letters, but also the understanding of the swaras, right? And in most of the Vedas, there are 3 swaras, but in the Samaveda, there are 7 swaras, sapta swaras. And these are the different intonations. Nirukta, or philological exegesis, elucidates the rare meaning of words, so the definition of words, right? Jyotisha, normally people would study dictionaries of Sanskrit jargon to understand Nirukta, but there is actually a book called Nirukta, And then there are other books like Amara Kosha. Kosha means a dictionary, which are made up to give synonyms and antonyms, words of similar meaning, words of opposite meaning in Sanskrit. So Jyotisha, astrology and astronomy, is that which fixes up the time for the study of the Veda, as well as sacrificial performances prescribed in the Veda. So there's also what's called Adhyayana and Anadhyayana. So there's a time when you can study the Veda, and there's times when it's prohibited to study the Veda also. So that also is understood by astrology and astronomy, right? As well as the time, the muhurta for fixed for a finding. Jyotish also has got these different 6 aspects too. Shiksha, just like when we were discussing about shiksha, the pronunciation Vedanga, right? It has sama. Varna, Swara, Matra, Sama, Varna, Swara, Matra, Bala, Sama, and Santana, 6 aspects. Jyotish also has different aspects like Gana, Gola, Ganita. Gola means, geography, and Ganita means mathematics, and Prashna means question, Hastareka means bumps on the head, lines on the hand, different things. Varshapala, which means omens, muhurta, which means, electional astrology to find out a particular time. So all these different Vedangas, they also are split up into different parts as well. Like that. So we'll continue on. Vyakarna, or grammar, determines the technique for word formation, accent, etc. Thus, the authoritativeness of the Veda with its limbs has been established. We established that Veda Pramana is the greatest Pramana, the highest Pramana, and therefore we established what is the Veda, right, and why it's authoritative. Then the Smriti, which is composed of trustworthy persons, right? Smriti, other literature. There's the Shrauta and the Smarta, the Shruti and the Smriti. There's the heard, and there's the remembered, right? There's the Veda, which is called Nigama, and then there's the Agama, which is the non-Veda, right? So when we say Smriti, we mean Agama, we mean anything else but the Veda, which is composed by trustworthy persons, right? So we don't just accept as scripture any old book, but it has to be by trustworthy persons, and which explains conduct, usages, expiation, etc. Expiation means prayaschitta, right, after doing something wrong. That are not opposed to the Shruti, that are not opposed to the Shruti. This is a very, very important point here, is also means of valid knowledge. So the Smriti, anything apart from the Vedas, are Swata Pramana. They are self-understood Pramana, right? They are a source of valid knowledge, right? And they have to be accepted always. But the Smriti can also be accepted where it is not opposed to the Shruti. Where it is not opposed to the Shruti. So if you read in some Smriti something and you understand it to be opposed to something in the Shruti, it can't be accepted. So if it goes along with what's in the Shruti, right, or if it doesn't oppose it, if it doesn't oppose what's in the Shruti, what's in the Vedas, then it can be accepted as a valid means of knowledge. So, though Hiranyagarbha and others, Hiranyagarbha also means Brahma, and others are trustworthy, still it's a possibility of the presence of the 3 gunas in them. There's a possibility of the presence of the 3 gunas in them. Such portion of their productions, namely yoga, Kapila, and other Smritis, as does not contradict the Smritis of Manu and others, are alone authoritative. So we have, for instance, in the Puranas, we have some Puranic statements which may go against things that we've understood because the Puranas are basically divided 18 Mahapuranas, and there are 18 Upapuranas also, but there are 18 Mahapuranas and divided up into 6 and 6 and 6, right, of Sattva-guna, Rajaguna, and Tamaguna, goodness, passion, ignorance. Okay, so again, Though Hiranyagarbha and others are trustworthy, still, owing to the possibility of the presence of the three gunas in them, such portion of their productions, namely Yoga, Kapila, and other Shmitis, as does not contradict Shmitis of Manu and others, are alone authoritative. But the portion which contradicts them is not authoritative because of the reversal of truth. The authoritativeness of Itihasa and Purana, right? The Itihasas are Ramayana and Mahabharata. The Puranas I just went through. There are 18 Mahapuranas divided up into goodness, passion, and ignorance, which possess the characteristic of being supplementary to the Veda, is self-established. The authoritativeness of the Itihasas and Puranas, which possess the character of being supplementary to the Vedas, is self-established. Of these, the Bharata or Mahabharata and the Ramayana appear contradictory in some places. They must be regarded as uncontradictory in their portions dealing with the truth, like Vedanta passages. So, although we might find in the Itihasas, we might find some contradictory statements, the statements on Vedanta should be understood to be in perfect harmony. Even in the Puranas, divided into three groups, Sattvika, Rajasika, and Tamasika, which treat 5 topics: Sarga, Upasarga. There's different Vamsa. There's a specific sloka which gives. There are 2 slokas. There's a sloka which gives the definition of Puranas. It has to have 5 subject matters in it. So Sarga is a creation. Pratisarga is subsequent creation, because the Lord creates the material universe, but then Brahma creates many things within the universe after the elements and everything are that's called Pratisarga. And so there are also other parts. There's Vamsa, there's the genealogy of kings, there's the Lord's avatars and Leelas and things. There are many things. There are these 5 basic things that have to be there in a Purana. Is the definition of Purana. There's also another verse which lays out 10 things, but they include the 5. So normally when we give the definition of Purana, we give this sloka which gives the definition of 5 things. Since there's no contradiction with regard to portions dealing with truth, the contradictory portion is unauthoritative, and everything else is authoritative. Yeah? It is just so in the case of Pasupata Agama. So Pasupada Agama, there's Pasupada Agama. The Pasupada Agama is the Shaiva Agama. And the Shaiva Agama is not considered authoritative because it's tamasic. It deals with the worship of Shiva, and it's tamasic. So it's not considered as authoritative. And therefore, the idea is that we have these groups of Shastras, right? And they may be Rajasic or Tamasic, right? And therefore, we can't accept everything in them as authoritative, but there might be something in them which is authoritative, only if it follows those other things which are given in the Sattvic Puranas or the Sattvic scriptures or the Vedas, right? So now we come to some other books. Sri Pancharatra Agama, divided into groups of Siddhantas, such as Agama, Divya Tantra, and Tantra, is authoritative in toto. So the Pancharatra Agamas are accepted in full as being totally authentic and acceptable. Since it does not contradict the Veda anywhere, it does not contradict the Shruti. And once again, we get this point that if it doesn't contradict the Shruti, if it doesn't contradict the Veda, then it's accepted. Even so in the case of the Vaikanasa Agama. So there are 2 Vaishnava Agamas, 2 Tantras that Vaishnavas can follow, Pancharatra or Vaikanasa, and both of them are considered in total to be authoritative by the school of Ramanuja. There are books like Agama Pramanya by Yamunacharya and the Pancharatra Raksha, right, by Vedanta Deshika, which establish this in more detail. The Dharma Shastras are also likewise. So there are different Dharma Shastras, right? And they are Standilya, Parasara, Bharadwaja, Vashishta, Harita, and others are the promulgators of the Dharma Shastras. So these are the authors of the Dharma Shastras. They're also considered authoritative. Shilpa, Ayurveda, Gandharva Veda, These are Veda. These are Upavedas. These are subsidiary to the Vedas. Shilpa, Ayurveda, Gandharva Veda, Bharata, and other sciences, right, are likewise authoritative in their useful portions, right? So there may be some parts which are useful and some parts which are not useful. Shilpa is the science which explains the method of plowing, construction of city gates, enclosures, ramparts, etc. Also the carving of deities, different making of buildings. So so Ayurveda is the science of medicine, right? Gandharva is that which teaches the technique of music, etc. Bharatagama is that which propounds the arts of dancing. We've heard of Bharatanatyam. Bharatanatyam means the type of dancing. In India, there's different types of dance, but here specifically they're talking about Bharatanatyam. You have Kuchipudi, you have Odissi, you have in Karnataka and Kerala, you have the Kathakali, and you have the I'm forgetting the one in Karnataka right now, but anyway, you have different forms of dance in India, traditional classical dance in India, but here we're talking about the Bharatanatyam. Okay, so again, among sciences, they are of the nature of 64 arts, and we're not going to go through all of them, but there's 64 arts. Whatever is useful in connection with truth, means, and highest welfare of man is authoritative. Right. The holy sayings of saints, like Bakula Birana, the Bakula Bharana, meaning the Bakula Birana means Namalwa, and others. So the Divya Prabandhas, right, are wholly more, and others are wholly more authoritative. So they're also authoritative. The treatises, so we have the here mentioned the Nalaya Divya Prabandham, and treatises like Shrivasya, etc., which are composed by Ramanuja and others, are also most authoritative. Right. Then we have Purusheya, right? These are all different categories. What originates from a person is that particular composition which depends on the freedom of the person. By this definition of kavya, poetry, natika, drama, alankar, rhetoric, it has been stated. Thus, the secular statements characterized by expectancy, compatibility, and proximity are also authoritative, as there are 5 fruits on the riverbank, right? So there may be even secular statements which are considered authoritative. Remember that we had the example in the previous chapter. We had the example of somebody telling somebody else about an animal which looks like a cow in the forest. The forester tells you that statement is authoritative because the person was trustworthy. In this manner, what is common to Vedic and secular statements is twofold, because of the difference as primary denotation and secondary denotation. Primary denotation is abhida vritti. For instance, the term lion denotes king of beasts. That's an example of primary denotation, or abhida vritti. Abhida vritti. Primary denotation, right? So primary meaning. So there's a primary meaning. When we look in a dictionary, we'll see the primary meaning. There may be a secondary meaning also. So it's also called mukhya vritti and a gauna vritti. So mukhya vritti means the main meaning of something, and the gauna vritti means for instance, the word Vedanta can mean the end of all knowledge. Veda anta. It's a compound. Veda anta. The end of anta, Veda, knowledge. The end of all knowledge, meaning the Upanishads. It's the end portion of the Vedas also. It comes last, the Upanishads. Right? In fact, in the Shukla Yajurveda, the 40th chapter, which is the last chapter of the Samhita, is in fact the Isavasya Upanishad. The Isya Upanishad. So the Veda comes at the last part of the Vedas. Of the Upanishads come as the last part of the Vedas. So it is known as Vedanta. But the word Vedanta also can mean Ve can be a prefix, which means without, and Danta can mean teeth. So without teeth. Vedanta means teeth. Now, if we're reading a book like this and we're reading about Vedanta, we're not reading about dentistry. We're not reading about teeth. So therefore, that's a gona vritti. That's a secondary meaning, which is not applicable in context. In the context of the book we're reading, or in the context of the subject that we're studying, Vedanta, right? The word Vedanta means the end of all knowledge or Upanishads. Okay, so here, so for instance, the term lion, specifically lion, right? The main meaning, or the mukhya vritti, or the abhida vritti, right? Can be called the dictionary meaning, right? Or the main meaning in the dictionary, right? Denotes the king of beasts. Primary denotation of words is manifold because of the difference as yoga, rudy, etc. So there may be many primary denotations of a word, right? And we have to understand by context and by interpretation what the word means. When the meaning indicated by the primary denotation is stultified, right? So if we say it's going to say, a town in the Ganges. Okay, we're going to talk about that. So when the meaning is indicated by the primary denotation is stultified, the meaning nearest to it is one denoted, and that denotation is the secondary one. So the secondary, or the gona vritti, right, becomes the main meaning only when the main meaning doesn't have any meaning. So it is of two kinds because of the difference as lakshana or goni. So there are two types of these secondary meanings, lakshana and goni. The first one is thus called a statement, an example of the first one, or the lakshana, right? A hamlet on the Ganga, or a town on the Ganga. So a town on the Ganga, if I say that Benares is a town on the Ganga, right? It doesn't mean that the town itself is in the Ganga, right? When I say something is on something, it can be right in it, right? So if I say a town on the Ganga, on the Ganges River, right? And since the location of the hamlet or the town on the Ganga is annulled, right? It's not actually in the river. The bank of the Ganga is indirectly implied, right? So it's on the bank of the river. It's not in the river itself. The second one, right? So we were talking about, that's an example of lakshana vritti, or a particular meaning by lakshana means a quality, right? And goni means secondary, right? So the goni, the second one is thus. Here's an example. Devadatta is a lion, right? Devadatta is a lion. Okay, so before we said the main meaning, the primary meaning of lion, of the word lion, is king of the beasts. So Devadatta, if I say Devadatta is a lion, I don't mean that he's an animal. What I really mean is that he's a great man. He's a strong man. He's a lion amongst men, right? So it's like an analogy. So this is a different way of explanation. So Devadatta is ascribed with the attributes of strength, etc., like a lion. Thus, the whole aggregate of sentences, Vedic as well as secular, has objects affected with difference and duality, right? So these things have to be taken into consideration when trying to understand or interpret not just Vedic sentences, but even ordinary sentences, like we had this example, Devadatta is a lion. So we have to understand these things correctly, right? So it's not just that we can quote the Veda, or we can quote some authoritative person saying something, even a secular thing, and understand it. We have to understand it properly. So the Acharyas propound that just as all words denoting the body, right? So we have a word denoting the body, sharira, or we also have the word atma. Atma could also mean the body, it can mean the soul, it can mean the mind, it can mean the body. Have their final meaning in the owner of the body, right? So who's the owner of the body? The owner of the body is the Lord. So all words that mean the body finally can mean the owner of the body. So all chit denoting words denoting chit, or a sentient being, right, such as Brahma, Rudra, Indra, Agni, right, Agni, Indra, etc., who constitute the body of Bhagavan, right? They're like the body of the Lord, right? And in fact, everything is the body of the Lord. Sharira, Shariri, Bhava is the idea of Ramanuja that the souls and the universe are the body of God, right? So, but in this case, the different devatas here, Rudra, Brahma, Agni, Indra, right, constitute the body of God, right, body of Bhagavan, and also the achit denoting words such as Prakriti, Kala, Akasha, Prana. These are going to be separately discussed in some other chapters, right? So Prakriti means nature, Kala means time, Akasha means sky or ether, right? Prana means air, right? Etc. Right? But previously, before in the first chapter in the enumeration, he described about 24 sections of achit, right? The 25th one being not achit, being chit, the soul, right? But there are these 24 elements in the Sankhya understanding of creation, right? So, and also the achit denoting words, right, which constitute his body. So all of these things together, the devatas and all the other sentients, right, and material nature, all constitute his body, have their final meaning in the owner of the body, Sriman Narayana, the Supreme Self. So, do you understand this? What it's saying here is that all words, absolutely all words, denoting everything, denoting all things, sentient and insentient, ultimately also have their final meaning as Sriman Narayana, the Supreme Self. He is the meaning of all words and all things, ultimately. It has been said that, and this is a very important point, it has been said that from the knowledge of Vedanta, the import of words become perfect. We shall expound on the avatara, and the avatara means the section of the book on Ishvara or God, that Narayana is denoted by all terms, that everything is his body, etc. So he won't go further on into this subject because this is a deep subject. He's going to explain further about this when we get to the section or the chapter on Ishvara or God. He'll describe about how Sriman Narayana is denoted by all terms and that everything is his body. Thus, Shabda or verbal testimony is explained. Here ends the third avatar of Shabda, on Shabda of Yatindramata Dipika, composed by Srinivasa Das, the foremost disciple of Sriman Mahacharya, an ornament in the line of the Sri Vadulas. And next time we will take up the next one, which starts off with Prakriti explaining about material nature. So that was a lot easier, I think, but still, Shabda is a subject which also has some understanding there. We can look at other schools of thought, other philosophical schools, and see what they say about Shabda also. So Pratyaksha, Anumana, and Shabda being the three pramanas, and we can look at the other systems of pramana of the other schools just to compare them. We can maybe have a look sometime. For instance, with the Gaudiya Vaishnavas, they have the Tattva Sandarbha, which lays this whole thing out as well, and Madhva has Pramana Padati and some other books which lay out their ideas like that, and they can be compared. Shankara also has his ideas, and there are also other schools of thoughts like the Buddhists, and we'll come across some of these differences in ideas if we study later on Indian philosophical systems by S.M.S. Chari, because it'll go through the different schools and what they believe. But I think it's pretty self-explanatory. But the main takeaway from Shabda is we have to understand that all, as it says here, it ended off saying all terms actually ultimately mean the Supreme Lord Sriman Narayana, and that Shabda is an authoritative statement, and that the Veda is Swata Pramana, is self understood, and then there are also some other books which are considered in total to be authoritative, like the Pancharatra and Vaikhanasa Agamas, and that other books have to follow. They have to follow the Vedas and things in them which are right and which do follow the Vedas can be accepted, just like the example was given of a tank. Somebody builds a tank, a pond, and he has pure crystalline water on top of it, but it has mud at the bottom. So we don't take the mud from any of these other scriptures, but we can take the pure water off the top. So if there's anything which is acceptable, we can accept it. Otherwise, we can reject it. We can reject the bad parts of it, like that, which is what the Sri Vaishnavas do. They accept some parts, like the Sankhya part of the Sankhya explanation of creation, but they don't accept Nirishvara Sankhya, the full system of Nirishvara Sankhya, which has creation without God. They don't accept that, but we accept the formation of the elements and the quintuplication, which is going to be explained perhaps in greater detail later on in Prakriti. And we'll talk about that later. So these are the main things: is the hierarchy of shabdas, of how we understand the definition of shabda and why it was a double negative, because it was a double negative because in order to show that the Veda is Apurusheya, is not authored by anybody. And it didn't go into too much about the faults that occur when something is authored, because basically we have to just look and see the personality of the author, and then we can take it from there. But we also have to, because Vedavyasa authored the Puranas, and there are Tamasic and Rajasic Puranas, we still have to take into consideration the subject matter, not just the person who authored the thing. Okay, so and I'm glad we got through that. I'm glad we got through this in one sitting, right? Because this is pulling teeth. This part, right? This is hard and boring, and then the other parts will be much easier and much more interesting.
Yeah, I really like the ending, and I was also listening to that Srivachana Bhushanam, and the Swami was saying that the Puranas are authored by Brahma, and that Brahma, when he was in different modes, that's why each one of the 6 main Puranas, come in those different modes. So I was just thinking about that also when you were mentioning about all of Veda Vyasa, put it in the writing. He's the one who compiled them. But ultimately, the Puranas come from Brahma. This is the belief of Sri Vaishnavas. So anyway.
Yeah, so the Vedas are heard. The Vedas are heard by Brahma, and then when he remembers the Vedas, he composes the Puranas.
Very good. And then they also talk about, yes, because it's not even, the Vedas are not even written by the Lord. The Vedas are eternal and not even written by the Lord in any way or authored by anyone at all. So that's very interesting, that it could be something as eternal as the Lord, also. So the Vedas, like they run parallel with the Lord or something. We would say that the Vedas is the Lord, isn't it?
Well, okay, so we have we have other eternals also, like the living beings. The living beings are considered eternal too. But we also have Vedic statements that say, in the beginning there was one, and the one became many.
Mm-hmm.
So in the beginning there was one, Sriman Narayana. And Atanityo Narayanaha, Shivastya Narayanaha, Sukastya Narayanaha, Disastya Narayanaha, Dhyalpatidhyaltya Narayanaha, Narayanaya Vedyakam Sarvam, Yadbhutam Yatchabhavyam, like that. So in the Narayana Upanishad and in other places in the Vedas, it says that in the beginning there was one and the one became many. So the many means the Vedas, it means the world, it means the souls, it means everything. So all these things which come ultimately from the Lord. And that's why, because the Lord is the origin of everything, also that the meaning of everything ultimately is the Lord. All the words ultimately mean him.
Right. Just like that last statement there. Okay.
Because he's the cause of everything. So he's the cause of the Vedas also. But we consider the Vedas to be eternal, just like we consider the soul to be eternal.
Eternal and unwritten even by him. That's kind of like, what blew my mind is that, he is the cause of everything. He is the root of everything. But yet still the Vedas are considered not to be written by him and you know, they didn't even say that he's the origin of them. Is that he just knows the Vedas and speaks the Vedas to Brahma.